Greetings, my paranormal patrons. This is the Monstrous Feminine Podcast Patreon, a space where horrible humans talk a little more about horror. My name is Zeba, and I'm joined by my Coven,
Mila,
Louisa,
and Taya.
And this is our bonus episode for our Cannibalism Horror Month. Thank you so much to our May Queen pledges on Patreon for supporting us.
This episode, we're going to be talking about the 2022 Black comedy horror thriller Fresh, directed by Mimi Cave. In this film, a young woman named Noah laments the world of online dating. However, romance appears to be very much not dead after she begins dating a seemingly perfect man named Steve, whom she meets in the grocery store. After several dates, Steve invites Noah for a weekend getaway at his luxury home. Against the advice of her best friend Molly, Noah agrees to the trip. Steve ends up drugging Noah and she wakes up chained in a small room where she can hear the voices of other captive women. Steve explains that he is a cannibal who gradually consumes and sells the meat of imprisoned young women to wealthy clientele. Noah and Steve's other hostage exes, each consumed to varying degrees, must work out a way to escape. What is your worst online dating story?
I think the worst case scenario is like showing up and immediately like not being attracted to them and like knowing that you're not going to go on a second date or talk to them any longer, but still having to sit through the whole date. Like that is a form of torture, I believe, by the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. It wasn't an online dating though. I just met them in heaven. I guess we both were blackout and didn't remember what the other person looked like. But like she asked me to go out and I was like, okay. But she'd sent a picture of her, a courtesy picture to jog my memory. And I was like, okay, she's cute. I did not reciprocate the photo. Big mistake. Because I just didn't want to take one and didn't have one, like one on my phone that I could send to be like, here's me today. And I met up and it was like so immediately obvious that I was not their vibe, which is okay. I don't have to be everyone's vibe. But like they did not say very much at all on the date. Like they were pretty quiet. It just went on so long because I feel like a lesbian date is like a minimum of 4 hours. And we were like walking around the Tate.
Come on. If you don't like each other.
I know, it was so tragic. Oh, I should say, this was my first date with a woman. I remember it was traumatizing. It was one of my worst dates and my first date with a woman. And I remember we were like at the Tate walking around and then afterwards it was like, oh, should we like go for drinks? And then we went for drinks but didn't talk. We were just sitting there. It descended into complete silence. So we both just started doodling on our respective napkins.
Just why don't you leave?
To be fair, it just seems boring. It wasn't like you were kidnapped and your meat sold.
I didn't say it was a Okay, actually I did use the word traumatizing.
I think my worst date, my friend and I she was sleeping over at my place. She had been ghosted by a guy and she was scrolling on my Bumble, just scrolling, and then he popped up and she swiped right and we matched and she was like, you have to go on a date with this guy and then ghost him as revenge for me.
That's like too much dedication for a friend. Sorry about it.
I went to meet him once and it was fine. It wasn't like a terrible date or anything. He just was like very into it. So I just kept having to go on like awkward pity dates.
I think you had to.
Gun to your head. She had to date this
Louisa,
man.
you had like a 5-hour date with someone that you didn't want to be with.
That's lesbians. It's in the rule book. It's like 4 to 5 hours minimum for a lesbian date. Okay, so what did you guys think of the film?
I thought Noah had no survival instinct. Going on a vacation with him against her own, like, she had the skeevies about it. Her friend told her no. She didn't really know much about him. She can really find him online. I thought that was insane.
It's kind of a lesbian thing to do.
The timeline is a lesbian timeline.
She thinks she can do a lesbian timeline with a man, and I'm like, critical mistake.
Critical mistake.
With the right man, I would do this, absolutely.
Men be like chronically offline sometimes in a way that like is not as suspicious as it used to be. Like I think more people are getting like completely offline, while like having a robust social media is very helpful in like sort of like sussing somebody out, like who their friends are and like what they do and where they go. That is super helpful. Like, I don't think that I would think to Google him. I don't think that I would. The difference between me and perhaps her is I would have had my location on. My friends would have known where I was. I would have been in constant communication with somebody.
They made her friend a bit unrealistic because, yeah, I feel like Molly's entire personality was like, one, slightly stereotypical. And two, they also made her like almost like mammy Noah. The extent of which she was willing to risk her own life for this girl who was not that concerned about her. The only black people in this movie are being like sacrificed to save this white woman. Arguably, I think this movie works very well as like a metaphor for how white women are able to benefit from white supremacy. Because Noah is the only person who's afforded the privilege of eating at the table with him and wearing nice clothes. And she even ends up eating her friend as well, eating her friend's breast. She became almost like an agent of the proximity of white femininity to white supremacy, and like the way that white women are able to feed into misogyny and white supremacy in the ways that women of color are never afforded. His wife is like a blonde-haired, conventionally attractive white woman, and he started to consider
blonde head.
Blonde-haired. She's like a blonde-haired white woman, and he starts to like consider replacing her with Noah. We know that she has like the prosthetic leg where he used to eat her as well. He also like indicates that there's also a value based on like their ethnicity of the meat. And so Noah is like more prized. I think she sees all of their victimhood as quite equal. And I'm not saying like she didn't go through it because he ate her ass.
Sorry.
Stop it.
Point me to the best ass eater. That's all I could think about during that scene.
It was a different experience than like Penny, who was like who he never interacted with. I think also she was the only one that he had sex with, her and his wife, which was also like a thing of like who he deems acceptable to like be intimate with and actually form a connection, because he's alluding to being in relationships to all these women, but he's only sexually intimate with the two white women. So there's a lot of like racial undertones going on in this movie, and it's kind of like I liked it. I thought it was fun and weird and gross and horrific and all of those things. But I was like, there's a layer of race going on here that I'm glad that they didn't hit it over the head per se, but I also feel like they kind of skipped over entirely in a way that kind of made it feel like racially blind.
I agree with all of what you said. I think this film is like an example of very obviously a filmmaking team putting a story together and then inserting POC queer side characters, either to include some like broader social commentary or as just a way to meet like diversity quotas. I hope it wasn't. It felt like a thoughtless addition to just be like, she's talking about fucking girls as well as men. Throwaway line in order to like infuse any kind of progressivity into the film. And then there's also like the way more disturbing connotations of just having a Black woman and an East Asian woman present in this sort of like cannibalistic Black market situation, which is like historically has horrific realities to it. And so I don't know if they thought that through, but also it's just like a strange undertone.
Especially because, like, we know that things are done with intention, right? This is a film about gender in a way that's intentional. It kind of felt like a throwaway when she's like, well, why is it all women? And he's like, because women taste better. I'm like, I can accept that because I was like, okay, there's some sort of legion of cannibalistic bajillionaires. Who knows what they believe or what their traditions are or whatever. So I can buy that. It feels like, I don't know, women's are just the victim of crime more often for like lots of reasons that are like not that they taste better. Like it's that like they're more vulnerable. Let's say we gender swap this situation and it was a man who agreed to go on a weekend trip with a woman that he just met on an app who seems like, I don't know, wealthy and in control of the situation. Like that would be sort of like kind of maybe like a good for her femme fatale type of like movie. Like it's completely different implication to me than the inclusion of, what is her name? The blonde head.
Anne.
Okay, well the inclusion of Anne is like absolutely gendered commentary about like self-preservation and like whatever we can even call it, like allyship or sisterhood, or what she owed the people who were like she knew were being perpetuated through this cycle. At the same time, we can empathize with her position and say, like, yeah, if I was his favorite and I had somehow, like, made it to the position of being his wife, I don't know what he's capable of, and there's no way I'm going to, like, risk my own safety to save other women. But like, I don't, like, to me, she's evil in that, like, she knows that this is going on and how many women are, like, presumably like brought through this system. I don't know how much she knows. It's almost worse that she's a victim and then a perpetrator, as opposed to just an evil woman who was in on it all along and didn't get her leg eaten.
I think you guys are like severely underestimating women. I think in this case, his wife is like another clear example of like being a white woman and what white womanhood affords you in terms of like being agents of misogyny, of white supremacy, because out of all of the women on the planet, the only one that gets close to the level of agency of a white man is white women. So no one else would ever have the type of agency that his wife has, and her being in that position and now being able to deal with her anger and her pain of being in the situation where she was a victim of violence, and I don't want to say oppressed, honestly, I don't want to say that, but as a victim of violence and then enacting that, to me, makes sense. It's not shocking to me that she would then want to put herself in a position of power over other women. It's like the ultimate girl boss gatekeep gaslight situation. It seems like she's even bought into the business because she's like, in order for us to keep making this money, y'all gotta die. And she is even chasing them herself to make sure that they can keep their current harvest and keep making money. Like, she doesn't really care. That being said, she is victimized, so it does take like a certain degree of like empathy that you have to have for the character. And there's also children involved, which makes things more complicated as well. But I will say, like, I don't like the fact that it's like an offhand mark that women taste better, instead of him delving into the reasons why it would make sense that he was targeting women. Like, the odds that he would be able to overpower men and like drag them into these dungeons and stuff is pretty low. And then also like the situation with Noah where he's telling her like over and over to keep drinking to see if she can guess the secret ingredient while he's not having a sip of anything. I think it would be, yes, there's situations where like he could target younger men or men who are smaller than him or something like that, but I also just feel like there's more agency that men have with each other than you have as a woman in like a man's house that you don't know. Like, if someone tells you to do something, you feel more inclined to do it because the odds that you think you can take them on if they try to fight you or force you are pretty low. You kind of are in survival mode in romantic instances with new people who you aren't comfortable with and you don't know, because if something goes wrong, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to like defend yourself against a dude. I don't think the average woman can hold her own against like a 5'8", 200-pound dude or something if push comes to shove. So you naturally just feel like a feeling of unease because you don't know how the situation is going to go. So like him telling her to drink this over and over and she's nervously drinking it, kind of freaking out, trying to get her phone to work and stuff, I thought was very realistic. However, I think if that was a situation where he was like, it was another guy, I think they would be like, the Wi-Fi is not working.
I think women are used to going along with it because they know that if you act afraid in front of a guy, that sometimes sets them fucking off. And they're like, what, you're afraid of me? What do you think I'm gonna do? And then, of course, they do something and it's like, that, I was afraid of that. So yeah, I can believe that a woman would like, I don't want to say passive because I think it's an active way of getting out of the situation is almost to just like placate.
I feel like this film is poorly marketed because they really like sell it as a sort of dating horror. And I don't see how that's relevant past literally when the title credits run. I don't see how the rest of the film, aside from like, I don't think I fully understood it, aside from it being like a literal commentary on the consumption and objectification of women's bodies, because it didn't feed, pun intended, like the cannibalism didn't feed back into the horror of dating culture. Like, I don't see how those are connected. Like, in every tagline I've seen for the movie, it's like, oh, like a commentary on the horrors of dating nowadays and online dating. And don't get me wrong, a worst case scenario would be you meet a guy online that you think you have a connection with, and then it turns out he's selling human flesh. But like the rest of the film is not concerned with that. It's very much more about consumption, but even that is very one note. I also don't understand the wife character. I agree with Ty. It's not unrealistic or unreasonable to think that a white woman would position herself as close as they can be within their own like gender politics that they can be in their position of power. It felt like a little bit too, I guess, reductionist to be like, and then there's a woman villain. I almost think that despite the fact we watch Sebastian Stan for the majority of the movie being just the most Sigma Patrick Bateman type whiny little bitch, repulsive little worm. And then I think that we're left with this feeling that this woman is like the main villain of it all. She's almost like a Disney villain. She's very like evil little woman.
And the film ends with her and ends with like them like battling, you know? So it's almost like the evil has been defeated, you know? I think that the point about commodification and consumption of women and objectification of women is very strong. Lauren Miles for Film Stories said like modern dating in a way is like grocery shopping. People get to browse to the available women and pick out the prettiest. And especially if this is me talking, if you add in online dating, it literally is a bit like shopping. And they meet in a grocery store, and it's all very ironic because he's a cannibal and he's going to consume her. And that point is all very obvious, but also like it does it well. You know, like that point's good, that point's strong. It feels a bit diffused because I'm not really sure what the commentary is, because it's meant to be like she has an online date, right? From a date with, it opens with a date with a guy from an online app, and it's terrible, and it's kind of like, ugh, romance is dead. And then she meets him, and it turns out that he's even worse than the online guys, and there seems to be a kind of, I don't know what the commentary is. Is it just that like men in general suck regardless of like dating apps or real life? And I read a good review which kind of summarized what I was struggling with. Mark Hansen for Slant Magazine says Cave and Khan satirically position Noah's situation as a logical extension of the aggressions that women face on the regular while navigating the dating scene. When Noah first wakes up inside Steve's basement prison, panicked and confused, the film's response is to sardonically shrug its shoulders while essentially proclaiming, "Bad boyfriends, am I right?" In theory, this is a gusty proposition, but the filmmakers seem more preoccupied with slotting in the next snazzy cover of a retro pop song on the soundtrack than in daring to make the thematic connections that would pull this kind of tricky tonal balance off. Later on, this continues and says, despite what Cave and Khan appear to be signaling, Steve isn't just another typical bad boyfriend experience writ large. He's a calculated serial abductor and murderer. This could have been a jumping off point to truly probe the thorny parallels between bad men like Chad and bad men like Steve. I do agree that I'm not sure what the connection is between the man at the beginning and then like, because you could almost interpret the ending as like, yeah, so that's why you should go back to the dating apps and date that loser guy. Do you know what I mean? I think it would have made more sense if she met Steve on the online dating app as well.
I don't think they connect cannibalism as, it's not like a symptom of toxic masculinity. Well, maybe it is. And sorry, wait, no, maybe it is.
We talk about like as women how men only view other men as like people who they respect or people who they want to impress and who they admire. And I think this movie makes the point of showing that even the women that he's quote unquote pursuing romantically, he has a hidden agenda to just consume them and profit off of letting other men consume them. It's like a very transactional way of seeing relationships, but I don't think it's necessarily a failed comparison, because I do think there is, especially in like when you look at like the men who are obsessed with the ideal of like a trophy girlfriend or something, is very similar to how in this one he's saying like women taste better, so we find women who no one's gonna miss and consume them, and then I make money by letting other men consume them. They also put their pictures there so the men can know that the person they're consuming is attractive or choose them based on how attracted they are to them. I think there is some like level to sexuality and dating in the consumption that he's doing, and also the way that someone coming onto you in a romantic way lets you put your guard down enough for you to not necessarily like be as creeped out as you were if he approached like random women and then like drug them and put them in a trunk.
I just think it would have been more strong if they had actually met on an app or something.
I don't think the film is, it's not ambiguous in what it's wanting to say about like how men in a like wider culture, how they dehumanize women, objectify their bodies, and how that's shown literally in this film as them eating women. Like it's a whole power play. And I think the line about women tasting better is simply within that understanding of like women historically, culturally just being forms to be consumed by men. And I don't think it's like necessarily that they literally taste better. It's more like it tastes better to consume a woman because of all the like gender politics and power plays that come into that. But I feel like the dating connection's still like, I don't think it's specific enough.
I was on an app recently. We won't discuss why. I was just experimenting. Immediately, they were like, how fast can you get here? Down to 5. Immediately, like, that's the first message. And it didn't used to be that way. They at least used to, like, pretend at least a little bit they wanted to know what your favorite color was or your mother's maiden name or some shit like that. So, like, maybe that first date where he wants to talk about family right away seemed really refreshing to her and, like, something that made her vulnerable and want to bring her walls down as opposed to a red flag. To me, the dating thing felt like the setup and not the thesis.
I like that this film does kind of point out the toxicity of romance, though. Like, it was a New York Times review, and it said, giving yourself over to somebody, becoming one with somebody else forever. Steve purrs to Noah, that's a beautiful thing. That's surrender. That's love. And then they said, no, that's a predator's dream. And that's, like, true. But also, I so want to give myself over and surrender to the oneness of love. So, like,
Louisa, what did I message you the other day?
I'm sorry. I love love.
Romantic love is a capitalist trap. To be fair, I was joking. But it's not wrong.
It's not wrong. You're totally right. But I just can't help it.
Wait, like they're trying to sell me Big Bears and chocolate, or like they're trying to sell me 2.5 kids and a white picket fence? Like, where's the trap?
All of the above. Also, it's individualist in a roundabout way because it puts so much emphasis not simply on the nuclear family, but also on romantic love as a partnership between two people that completely excludes like the love and support you get from a wider community.
All of this is very, very true, but I want it.
Thank you for listening to The Monstrous Feminine. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, SoundCloud, and Spotify at The Monstrous Feminine Podcast and on Twitter at The MonFemPod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and follow us on TikTok at The Monstrous Feminine Pod for podcast clips and more fun. Brooms up, witches out.